Primary elections are set to take place in a number of key states ahead of the November midterm elections, and the battle between former President Donald Trump and establishment Republicans like former Vice President Mike Pence and Governor Doug Ducey is continuing today in Arizona.
In the GOP gubernatorial primary, Trump has backed TV news anchor Kari Lake, while Pence is supporting businesswoman Karen Taylor Robson. The outcome of today's Arizona elections could be telling of a direction in which the GOP might be moving. The Hill political reporter, Julia Manchester, joins us now to tell us what we should be watching for today. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you for having me.
So how does it look like this one's going to go? Is establishment Pence on the upswing, or is it still Trump country?
You know, it seems like according to the polls that we have seen, it is still Trump country. We know that Kari Lake has been in this race for roughly a year. She has a high name ID. She's a former television news anchor in Arizona. And we've heard Trump talking about her and many prominent Republican figures in Arizona politics on the Republican side, such as the GOP chairwoman Kelly Ward, also boosting her. So that's definitely going in her favor. That being said, we've definitely seen Karen Taylor Robson get some momentum in the polls. The problem is she just doesn't have that high name ID. And a lot of sources I was actually talking to yesterday really question whether the Pence endorsement really helped her. Yes, she has the endorsement of Governor Doug Ducey, definitely a big Republican name in the state. However, there's a question as, you know, if Pence's star power really matches that of President Trump's. And right now in the polls, it seems like she's a bit behind. However, we do know that there are often surprises in Arizona, so we will have to see.
Kari Lake has been very much on the stolen election beat. She has made it a really focal point of her campaign. She has not shied away from talking about it. I've seen her on Fox being interviewed by Bret Baier, and she actually got combative with him for not covering the election being stolen enough. From her perspective, obviously the election was not actually stolen, to be clear. Don't come after us, YouTube. It's something she's just really made the central focus. So my guess would be, if she's rewarded for that, if she wins this race today, then it looks like Republicans who want to move on from Trump, who want to move on from talking about the election, it'll be a lot harder for them to say, yeah, this is what our base wants. Our base is sick of relitigating 2020. We want to talk about the future, when this person who really talks about the last election a lot wins.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you make. And it's not only Kari Lake in Arizona that's talking about this. We have the Attorney General's nominees in Arizona running on the Republican side talking about this. Mark Fincham, who's running for Secretary of State, he's been talking about this quite a bit. Blake Masters is a Senate candidate running the front runner in that primary. He's talked about this as well. So you basically have Republicans up and down the ballot in Arizona continuously talking about the election being stolen, or the unproven claim, I should say, that the election was stolen. And they're very much kowtowing to President Trump's voter fraud claims. But I think context is very important here, because if we look at the history of Arizona, Arizona was definitely one of the major launching pads for President Trump's 2016 presidential race. We know that he's made a lot of visits there. We know that he took it quite personally when he lost that state. A lot of state Senate Republicans very much spearheaded that audit that was notoriously held there last year that actually found that President Biden won by a slightly bigger margin. But we know that Arizona is very important to President Trump. And I think you see all these major MAGA figures in Arizona very much echoing that. The issue is, once you get out of a primary, how do you get those independent voters? Because in Arizona, you can't really win a race going far to the left or far to the right. You have to very much stray to the middle, or at least we've seen that in recent elections, whether it's Mark Kelly or Kyrsten Sinema, for example. Doug Ducey definitely is more conservative. However, we do know that his opponent in his last election, according to people I've chatted with and post-election analysis, they would say that his opponent went a bit too far to the left. So it's really about striking that right balance in Arizona. And there's a fear amongst many Republicans that this current slate that Trump has endorsed will go too far.
And then there is also Missouri. Last night, President Trump weighed in on the GOP primary there, endorsing Eric, no last name, just Eric, which led to some slight confusion, given that both rival candidates, and there's more than just the two of them, I think there's even a third Eric there somewhere, Eric Greitens and Eric Schmidt. So Trump chose chaos, apparently, and it was deliberate. In his statement, then, he said, "I trust this decision to be made by Missourians." So he was not actually endorsing one particularly, although both campaigns said that this counts as an endorsement. Both put out statements saying Trump has endorsed me, which was kind of hilarious. This race being interesting because Eric Greitens, one of the two candidates, is a former Missouri political figure who resigned in disgrace. I think there was a point where then Attorney General Josh Hawley was looking at having to prosecute him for some really out there scandals, and to have him mount a political comeback as like the more Trumpy kind of candidate. But it was interesting. It was going to be interesting to see if Trump was going to pull the trigger and endorse him, as I think some members of his inner circle or even his family have wanted him to do, or are supporting Greitens. But he didn't quite do it. But what he did was, I guess, characteristic for Trump. Just Eric. And vote for any old Eric.
Well, I think this is what we in the business would say, walking a fine line. Look, Eric Greitens is someone politically who probably very much matches up with President Trump. However, he has been tainted with all of these scandals, most recently being accused of domestic abuse by his ex-wife. So that's obviously, he obviously has a tainted record in that regard. And you have the GOP establishment, whether it's Rick Scott in the Senate Republican Campaign Committee, or you have Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell very publicly saying that they are concerned about the prospect of a Greitens candidacy, because if Greitens were to win this primary, Missouri should be an easy state for Republicans, but it's so easy for the Democratic nominee, whether it's Lucas Kunce or some of the other Democrats running in that race, to point at that and say, well, look at who Republicans nominated. So I think Eric Schmidt for the Republican establishment was absolutely the safer bet. We've seen a lot of, Republicans rallying around Schmidt, forming a super PAC, pouring money into his campaign. But the issue with that is that we know that President Trump notoriously doesn't get along with Mitch McConnell and some of these establishment figures backing Schmidt. So he was walking a fine line. Eric 2022, I guess, is the phrase of the day. But we'll have to see. Missouri should be an easy pickup for Republicans. So it's interesting that this primary has garnered so much coverage because of this extremely controversial figure who's quite frankly not a good political candidate.
Yeah, it's such a Republican state, but if any candidate was going to put it in range for Democrats, it would be Greitens, which I think is part of the reason. Josh Hawley begged Trump to endorse a non-Greitens figure, but Trump doesn't do what he's told. It's not who he is. Well, we'll be following these election results very carefully, and we'll talk about them more tomorrow and later in the week. Julia Manchester, thank you so much for breaking it down.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.